All television and radio stations in the United States will now cease their regular programming.
Well, there's plenty of young people in the United States that have their alarm set early this morning. That's because they're going to be heading on these climate strikes. And this is a map showing whereabouts in the US these are going to be taking place. But let's just zoom out and you can see that this is certainly part of a wider movement.
As you can see in verse 15 of Daniel chapter 11, the arms of the south shall not withstand the king of the south, at this point in Daniel chapter 11 being the United States, called Manasseh prophetically, which means forgetful or causing to forget, neither his chosen people, his elected officials, neither shall there be any strength to withstand the one world political system coming into being at the woe of the fifth trumpet. After the great horn of the he-goat is broken, so to speak, which is the same word in the Hebrew as destroyed in Daniel chapter 11 verse 20, the one who sends a raiser of taxes being the subject of Daniel chapter 11 verse 20, not the raiser of taxes, but the one who sends a raiser of taxes, the United Nations, the great horn of the he-goat written of in Daniel chapter 8 verse 8, the Paris Climate Agreement being an agreement within the United Nations framework, Convention on Climate Change, and the ultimate eventuality of that obviously is a global carbon tax, a raiser of taxes. You have to think global when it comes to Daniel chapter 11 or you're not going to understand. And the Paris Climate Agreement went into effect November 4th, 2016, just before the presidential election, after which the candidate chosen announced on June 1st, 2017, the United States would withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. But the earliest date the U.S. can withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement is November 4th, 2020, the day after the presidential election of that year. But again, the subject of Daniel 11:20 isn't the raiser of taxes, but rather the one who sends a raiser of taxes, as you can see in the Green's Interlinear, as well as many other translations, including a book co-authored by James Strong, who put together the Strong's Concordance called the Book of the Prophet Daniel. On page 246, one that causeth an exactor of taxes to pass over, or one that sendeth out a driver. The driver to the ornament of the kingdom was obviously a collector of money or of tribute, taxes, a global carbon tax in my opinion. And the one who sent the Paris Climate Agreement was the United Nations, the great horn of the he-goat you can read of in Daniel chapter 8 verse 8. And once the great horn is broken, so to speak, the 5-month-long hour of temptation begins when the four notable ones, which are the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7, emerge at the woe of the fifth trumpet.
Last in a week, more than 1,500 events have been organised across the globe.
The king of the south in 1945 becoming Manasseh, which is the United States, who was used by the Kenites to bring about the United Nations that same year, which was when the third trumpet of Revelation chapter 8 began to sound. And in 1948, Kenite-occupied Israel came into being, which is when the fourth trumpet began to sound. 21 years later, in 1969, the fifth trumpet began to sound, 5 being grace in biblical numerics. And in my opinion, Russia's entry into Syria in 2015 is where Daniel chapter 11 verse 13 fast forwards to, and this is all gone into in greater detail in the Daniel 11 hypothesis on biblicalresearchlabs.com. For the king of the north shall return, the third king of the north, which is the Russian Federation, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south, the United States, at this point in the chapter, the other horn of the ram back in Daniel chapter 8. Also the robbers of thy people, the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8, shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. Those who claim to be of Judah and are not, but do lie, that goat fig nation, who through their four hidden dynasties operate out of all the nations of the world, twisting reality in the minds of the biblically illiterate. It's a Kenite-occupied planet in all reality, so don't deceive yourself by focusing exclusively on one geographic location. So the king of the north, the Russian Federation, shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, not just in Syria, but globally also, with communistic atheism by stealth through politics and the left-right paradigm symbolized by Ammon and Moab. And also at this time, we see what will become become the bear of Daniel chapter 7 formulating, which is the Ezekiel 38 confederacy. And the arms of the South shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, the elected officials Americans think will save them from globalism, you could even say, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. The New World Order, as it's called, cannot be stopped because it's the one world political system of Revelation 13, which we'll see described in detail beginning with verse 21. But first, we rewind in verses 16 through 19 for a closer look at the League of Nations, which provided the skeletal structure for the United Nations, which we'll see in verse 20, which will eventually provide the skeletal structure for the actual one world government. We'll see from verses 21 onward to the end of the chapter. But he that shall come against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land which by his hand shall be consumed. Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations, paving the way for Kenite-occupied Israel, the glorious land being that same geographic location. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. The Balfour Declaration leading to the British Mandate. Thus shall he do, and he, that is to say Ephraim, via the British Mandate, shall give him the he-goat, the daughter of women, which is Jerusalem, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. After this shall he turn his face toward the isles, and shall take many. The nations who joined the League of Nations would later join the United Nations, and at the woe of the fifth trumpet will become the one world political system, the New World Order. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. This first attempt at a global government would fail, in other words, when World War II broke out in 1939. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then shall he turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. With the covenant of the League of Nations originating at the Paris Peace Conference, what happened to France during World War II illustrates what a failure this attempt at so-called world peace was, but it did provide the skeletal structure for the next step toward one worldism, the United Nations, the great horn of the he-goat written of in Daniel chapter 8. Then shall stand up in his estate one who sends a raiser of taxes, to better translate the verse, in the glory of the kingdom. But within few days he shall be destroyed, which is the same word in the Hebrew as broken in Daniel chapter 8 verse 8, neither in anger nor in battle. A few days meaning a few years. The Paris Climate Agreement being brought about by the United Nations going into effect in 2016. The ultimate eventuality being a global carbon tax, a raiser of taxes. So this fixes the time frame in my opinion. But the great horn, which is the United Nations, will be broken, after which the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7 emerge at the woe of the fifth trumpet, when Satan and his angels, who are Daniel's fourth beast, are cast to earth, Satan being the vile person of Daniel chapter 11 verse 21, not appearing as Antichrist until verse 31.
On Tuesday, climate activists performed a funeral in front of London Fashion Week. Some called for the cancellation of the event.
Trump has announced U.S. withdrawal from the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty, saying the United Nations will soon receive a formal notice that America is rejecting this treaty. Another step toward the breaking of the great horn of the he-goat written of in Daniel chapter 8 verse 8, in my opinion. Remember, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement in June of 2017, even though that can't happen officially until November of 2020. The United Nations is the one who sends a raiser of taxes in Daniel chapter 11 verse 20, the United Nations, who brought about the Paris Climate Accord, a global carbon tax being the ultimate eventuality of the Paris Climate Accord. That's what the raiser of taxes is, in my opinion. And all this is in the Daniel 11 hypothesis you can find on biblicalresearchlabs.com. The one who sends the raiser of taxes is the subject of Daniel chapter 11 verse 20. The one who gets destroyed, which is the same word translated as broken in Daniel chapter 8 verse 8, the United Nations, that is to say, in my opinion. And there were various other moves toward destroying the United Nations from 2017 up to now, with the latest being the withdrawal from the UN Arms Treaty. And in the aftermath of the U.S.-Russia collusion accusations, now the United States, who is the current king of the South of Daniel chapter 11, and the Russian Federation, who is the current king of the North, can collude all they want, and it's happening already, with Russia and the United States going against a United Nations call for a Libyan truce. as reported about a week ago, you can also expect to see cooperation between the United States and Russia over North Korea, with Vladimir Putin just meeting with Kim Jong-un. And once the great horn of the he-goat is broken, the four notable ones, which are the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7, will rise up together in the new world order like a phoenix from the ashes of the United Nations, once Satan and his angels are cast from heaven to earth at the woe of the fifth trumpet. Only then does the one world political system written of in Revelation chapter 13 come into existence, which is then wounded to death, after which Satan appears as the false Christ. Then it goes from being a one world political system to a one world religious system at the woe of the sixth trumpet. The true Christ does not return at all until the woe of the seventh trumpet. And as the true Christ said in the last verse of Mark chapter 13, what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch.